Hello and welcome to the Broadcast Newswrap, your shorthand guide to the week's TV news stories, brought to you by the telly obsessives in the broadcast editorial team. I'm senior reporter Max Goldbart, and this week I'm joined by fellow reporter Desiree Ibekwe and international editor John Elmes to talk diversity, John Whittingdale, and beyond distribution. Des will be bringing us up to speed with her work speaking to a wealth of BAME-led production outfits, while we'll have all the latest insight on a week in which things turned sour for the BBC as an old foe returned to the fore, and there was yet another shift in the UK's distribution landscape. All that, plus what we've been watching on this week's Broadcast News Wrap. So welcome back to the News Wrap, and it's Des and John, who I'm joined by today to talk a plethora of different topics. John, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Max. Enjoying a nice leisurely afternoon. That's not right. That's not true at all. I'm busy at work, and then I'm also recording this important podcast.
Almost got yourself caught out there, John, but just managed to cover for yourself in time. And Des, I assume your afternoon isn't as leisurely as John's.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite. I've been working so hard. I've been wondering where John has been, actually.
It's unleisurely.
I'm now unceremoniously thrown under the bus by my colleagues.
Under the bus he goes. Des, you've been working on a piece, speaking to some BAME-led indies. We're a few weeks down the line from the tragic death of George Floyd and the sort of ensuing fallout that did have a rather big impact on the TV sector. Even this week, schemes and initiatives and whatnot are still coming in. So the last few days, we've had a £12 million BBC Radio diversity pot, which is not dissimilar from the BBC TV £100 million, which we spoke about on this podcast a few weeks ago. And ITV has committed to some short films, and those aren't too dissimilar to those commissioned by Channel 4 a few weeks ago, again, in the wake of George Floyd's death. Des, what are some of the takeaways from the conversations that you've been having?
You know, it's kind of a mixed bag. I think with all the schemes that are coming out, it's obviously a very good thing that people are starting to, or broadcasters are starting to actually put their money where the mouth is and kind of help fund diverse content, but also help out BAME Indies, which is a kind of area of the industry that I think, deserves a little bit more love. Happily, some of these schemes seek to kind of address that. Saying that, as ever, nothing can be completely perfect. And when I spoke to a number of kind of MDs, there were things that came out, take the Channel 5 scheme, for example. A lot of indie bosses praise that because it's about networking. These relationships will last way beyond the scheme and something that will have longevity. And that sustainability is actually the most important thing when thinking about diversity industry and what initiatives and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, people are happy and are optimistic, but are also cautious because this has been a conversation as we've said this before, but has been going on for a very, very long time. So yeah.
You always feel like there's going to be a degree of skepticism just because of the length of time that these conversations have been had. What would you say the role of the super indie or the role of the larger established indies is playing?
Yeah, that was a really interesting part of the conversation that actually kept coming out. These indies have the ability to kind of throw a lifeline to smaller, less established companies. And, if they're willing to, help the industry as a whole, then really there should be businesses that they look at and they see potential in that are run by people who are Black or from Asian or minority ethnic backgrounds. Mm-hmm. Then they can, take them under their wing. So I spoke to Nisha Party, who founded Party Productions, and she spoke about the importance of being taken under Kudos's wing very early on, seeing how, sitting in on their development meetings and seeing how they went about, producing and how integral that was to them moving on and being successful going forward. So I think there's definitely a role for indies, and I think it's, obviously broadcasters, it's easy to hold them accountable. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. But also, I spoke to Faraz Osman, who heads up Goldwaller, and he said something really interesting. So instead of, let's say, they go to the BBC with an idea, and obviously they don't have the infrastructure or resource to make that happen, they'd pay them with a bigger indie. He says that that should happen in like a reverse order. So when there's a big commission, broadcasters or indies should take it upon themselves to be like, okay, let's pair with a smaller, diverse indie. Let's get FaceTime with their talent. Let's get FaceTime with the connections that they have, and that way you don't have to invest in them, but you're still giving them an opportunity to see how you work and hopefully have a long-standing relationship. So I think it's really all about network.
And I imagine there's a lot of room for improvement in that area, because it seems like we're only just getting to the point where broadcasters are enacting these more mid-term or long-term schemes whereby you pair up with a smaller, diverse-led indie. So doing it with a large indie and a smaller, diverse-led indie feels like that probably isn't happening nearly as much as it could. And also, what I imagine came up a little bit, and I remember this again from a survey that we conducted last year. Do these people feel like they are put in a box and kind of forced to make programming that is about their specific makeup or their specific ethnicity or whatever it might be, rather than just being able to make TV shows about whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that kept cropping up. And obviously, when I asked them the question at the top, they said, I'm interested in making shows that relate to my cultural heritage, shows that I feel like I can do justice. But like when you want to venture out of that box, do broadcasters want to hear that from you? Are you able to make a show about the Kennedys or the royal family? Will that be taken seriously? And a lot of people feel like they won't be taken seriously, and they need to kind of stay in that identity lane. One MD actually described it as, I'm going to focus in on this and try and build up clout, and hopefully eventually I'd be able to go on and do something else. While another said, I'm worried about if I do that, that's just all that people will see me for, and I won't be able to make a show about trains or engineering. So I think it's about striking a balance, but it's not really on the indie. Faraz Osman actually said that, when you're briefing stuff out, let's say you want a show about Christmas, why don't you send that brief out to 6 or 7 BAME indies and get them to make something about Christmas, rather than, going to them when there's an Asian season on. So yeah, I think that's a place, obviously there's an internal kind of figuring out where that balance lies, but it's also on the broadcasters to try and give them the opportunity to do something that's a little bit less identity centric.
It's tough, isn't it? But if you're looking at I think that this is a bit of a sad reality, but if you're looking at like company growth, for example, it's those sort of formats that are about anything, those more long running series that are going to really, like, they could sell abroad or they could mean a constant stream of income. Those are the sort of series that are about the, I don't know, more sort of general stuff that maybe these guys feel they aren't being commissioned for. Whereas it feels like it would tend to be the sort of shows that we're talking about cultural heritage or whatever it might be. It's probably a one-off. It's probably something that could do quite well critically, but that's not going to like guarantee your income as a small company for 2 or 3 years.
A long-running format, entertainment format should be created by anyone, and those ideas come from anywhere. As exactly as Des says, if you want to make a show about Christmas, send that brief out to all indies, and the ones who come up with the best idea get the commission.
To me, the real change will come when commissioners understand an indie being run by somebody from a diverse background can improve a show that isn't necessarily about that person's background or about that person's cultural heritage, but just like your everyday format will be made better by having that diverse voice behind it. And that, I don't know what you think, Des, but that's something that still feels probably quite far away.
Yeah, I think it's definitely about like reorienting like how people view people that come from a Black or Asian minority ethnic background.
I listened to a showrunner panel which was organised by Banff Media Festival the other day, and Elle Johnson, who is the co-showrunner of the Netflix show Self-Made, inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker, which stars Octavia Spencer. She was tired of the kind of arguments from commissioners that said, we don't see colour or we don't see identity. We just want the work with the best. And she said that the best, whatever that is a value judgment. So the idea of what the best producer is or the best talent to work with is going to be totally different to someone else. And you can say that you want to work with the best craft, so the person who's got the best craft, but this is an opportunity to kind of teach craft. And then we're all in the indie community, and the TV community is all craft professionals, and they all have expertise, and you learn that and you help nurture that, and then you'll improve. You know, I think one of the arguments is that's gone on for so long, and this is long been in the indie community, is that certain broadcasters go, well, we know that label, we know that exec producer, we know that writer, let's just go with them. Oh, they're the best because look what they've done in the past. And then, you know, the pool is already tiny and even more slanted away from BAME-led indies or indies of led by diverse people. Elle Johnson was making that point, we should be focusing on craft as opposed to the best, which is a complete value judgment. What was if there have been any viewpoints about ITV's shorts, which were announced the other day?
That's definitely a conversation that has a lot of validity. But actually, when I was speaking to Faraz Osman again, actually, he said that, you know...
Should have invited him on, shouldn't we?
I know. Just his mouth.
The all-seeing Faraz.
Yeah, I mean, like, it was interesting because he said that, you know, the biggest issue for indies is cash flow, right? And when you look at terrestrial television, there's X amount of slots that you have to fill, and there's a lot of people vying for those spaces. So if you're going to wait for a commission, you're going to be waiting for a very long time. So if what broadcasters need to do is have more avenues for people to try and get in and produce content, so that they can, one, stay afloat, and also, you know, digital content doesn't necessarily have to be inferior. There's loads of different ways to be an indie now. You don't necessarily need to be on at like ITV at 9 p.m. Obviously, it would be great to have more Black-owned companies and stories being told on terrestrial television. But actually, if you want to have more indies, or if you want to have indies that have greater longevity, maybe, you know, having these shorts or having an avenue for people to do that, to make content, isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I'd never really thought about that, because I was of the camp that obviously this is great, but, you know, it'll be great if, you know, we could be on Channel 4 or BBC. So digital is the hill that I'll die on. Like, I spend most of my time on YouTube, and I think there's a lot of great creators, a lot of great Black creators. I think I was speaking to Angela Ferreira from Douglas Road, and she mentioned SBTV. SBTV hasn't really been anywhere near terrestrial television, and yet, you know, they're like a kind of stalwart of the content landscape. So I think, you know, maybe it's just the way that people view it, or the way it's spoken about, that kind of affects the way that people see these things.
Digital. That's where it's at, and it's the hill that Des is going to die on. But we all look forward to reading your piece, Des, and it's been really interesting to talk about this stuff in a little bit more depth.
So, Max, you've been keeping your eye on the political machinations this week, as you always do. And the person who's in the news is our old friend, Mr. Whittingdale. What's he been up to?
He's popped back up. And there's been John Whittingdale, the now culture minister and former culture secretary when the 2015 charter negotiations were sealed. Negotiations that are always referred to as shotgun. Every time anyone ever refers to the charter negotiations, they call them shotgun, which I don't know if it's a fair reflection or not. So Whittingdale's been returned to the culture department for a few months, and he's been quite quiet as a person who has always very much been seen as an enemy of the BBC, enemy of Channel 4, a bit of an enemy of public service broadcasting, like across the board. He has been quite quiet, and when he has spoken, he's sounded relatively sympathetic towards the plight of the BBC in particular, if we're talking about the Beeb. But this week, an urgent question was asked in the Commons by a Lib Dem MP called Daisy Cooper, who's not to be confused with the creator of This Country. They're actually different people. And the question was addressed to Whittingdale. and it was around the regional cuts that the BBC is being forced into making. And I always think the response from the culture department to this stuff, it's really important to listen to the language as much as it is to take the content as a whole. And I felt like there was a marked shift between the way Whittingdale was talking this week and the quite decent amount of goodwill that has been afforded towards the BBC right during the crux of the coronavirus crisis. So if you go back to April and May, you felt like the BBC had really earned up a lot of this goodwill, and it had hit a really good head of steam. It had pivoted towards news, pivoted towards education, pivoted towards entertainment. And the things politicians were saying were broadly very nice about the BBC. But this week, John Whittingdale has said he is deeply disappointed in the BBC's decision to roll out over 75 licence fee payments on the 1st of August. And he has really given short shrift to the fact that the BBC has to make cuts in the regions, quite swinging cuts that are being made. But his response is, you should have looked elsewhere. I think the guy feels like he knows the BBC very, very well. And to that point, he is confident enough to say things like, I know the BBC is bloated in a certain area, and I know that you didn't necessarily have to get rid of a bunch of journalists covering a local news programme or cutting Inside Outback or whatever it might be. So I think it was the language that I found most interesting, and I think what is going to happen soon is that we'll have a return to the attacks on the BBC that it was experiencing right at the start of this year, which seemed to be a bit of a nadir, to be honest. The Sunday Times briefing about the corporation being whacked, which was widely known, widely thought of as being a Dominic Cummings ploy. That was in February of this year, approximately. And this language from Whittingdale and what he was saying seemed to echo that much more than it did that goodwill period.
You don't say those things without really considering them, and they were very, very hard on the BBC. And as you say, the BBC had a lot of goodwill recently because of its response to coronavirus. How in what capacity are they? To what capacity are they? Valid?
I think they're pretty unfair, to be honest, and I think any a neutral industry observer would think they're a little bit unfair. Certainly, regarding the over 75 licence fee payments, which are probably, as I think about it more, is potentially the thorniest issue of the decade for the BBC, and will probably dominate Tony Hall's legacy when he leaves in a few weeks. He will be seen as the one who lost the over 75s battle, and neutral industry observers will, I think, understand that the government has really stitched the BBC up on this one, because what essentially happened is in 2015 during the shotgun charter negotiations, the government was able to move the concession for over 75 licence fee payments to the BBC in return for various other things. And then between the 2015 to 2018 period was able to convince the public that the BBC had suddenly decided to charge pensioners for licence fees, which is a very charged issue in itself. And it's all been a PR war that the BBC has definitely lost, and unfortunately has been way too late to react to that war. And now when you hear people in the BBC speaking publicly about it, they say they were essentially the victim of a stitch up, and it's all about the concession moving. But it's a little bit too little too late, and I think to the general public, the government has been very successful in making it look like the BBC just decided to do that. John Whittingdale's remarks were almost beyond the pale, and segueing very poorly onto our next topic. John, you've been covering some news this week about Beyond.
Broadcast broke a story today about Beyond Distribution, or as was Beyond Distribution, which is a London-based but Australian-owned company. They've rebranded as Beyond Rights, and part of that rebrand is they're kind of bringing in the other distributor that they bought earlier this year, which is TCB Media Rights, a factual and unscripted distribution company that was previously owned by Q Media Distribution, but was sold off when Q Media went into dissolution, as it were, earlier this year, and Beyond picked up TCB media rights, and Beyond have since really kind of ramped up their international exposure and position in the fact that another story that Broadcast broke a couple of weeks back was that they acquired 7 Studios UK to become Beyond Production. So they bought a production company and having added TCB media rights, and now they've kind of rebranded their distribution business. Basically, they've also hired Kate Llewellyn-Jones as the new chief of its international distribution division. And I spoke to the CEO, Michael Borgland, and Kate about this before the story broke. Michael Borgland told me, he hopes to turn into a 40 million Australian dollar turnover business in the next year, and that's about 22.4 million pounds. So he's really looking at scale, and that comes with expertise. Obviously, a big catalogue. I think the catalogue that they're bringing together is about 7,500 hours. They've got really good connections with producers around the world, the UK, obviously, Australia, where Beyond, as a company, Beyond International, the parent company, resides. And it's part of a strategy to really ramp up Beyond as a content powerhouse, both in Australia and around the world.
What's quite interesting for our listeners is that many probably wouldn't even have heard of Beyond a few months ago. I'm not sure I had, and yet this sounds like it's going to kind of inexorably shift the distribution landscape in the UK. Well, what do you think the impact is going to be on the other big distributors now that we've got this other big player that seems to be making lots of sort of repeated and regular plays in the UK market?
I think one of the important points to make is that the distribution landscape does allow for different types of businesses. One of the points that Beyond were making was that without being a monolith of gigantic proportions, as some people have described what ESG and Banijay together, which is now Banijay Rights, that's their distribution arm, could be viewed as, and they still feel that by having a substantial amount of hours in their catalogue, but the personal connections, there's something in being a bit smaller, more nimble, that kind of thing.
And now on to our next segment, which we like to call What We've Been Watching. Des, we're going to start with you. What have you been watching?
I have been trying to counteract my Love Island withdrawal symptoms by watching Love Island Australia.
Damn.
Yeah, like I fully caught up with like the first 15 episodes in a day and a half or so. Like I fully just sat in one place and just watched the entire thing.
What are the differences between Oz and the UK?
Yeah, so this what ITV show are currently showing is the 2018 series. So it's the first Australian series, which means that the budget isn't it's not the same. I think the people, because it's the first series in Australia, is a little bit more raw. Like people aren't as kind of refined and not being awful to each other. So it's very good television. Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly sating the Love Island shaped hole in my heart, but it's definitely helping. Obviously not as many people are watching it, and you don't have that kind of social media buzz around it. So that it's actually crazy how much that impacts your viewing experience, I think, because it's easy to kind of get I don't know, you're not as engaged, I think, in a weird way. I don't know if that makes sense.
John, what's been on the box for you?
I'm also watching an Australian show, as it happens. I'm watching a dating show, for that matter, broadly speaking. It's a docuseries called Love on the Spectrum, which was originally aired on the ABC in Australia earlier this year, but is now on Netflix internationally. I started watching it yesterday, actually, and it is a very intimate docuseries based on people who are on the autistic spectrum and their attempts to or kind of forays into the romance world. And it's so it's obviously got some important factual background as well. It feels kind of more specialist factual ob doc. It straddles a lot of genres. There's not much narration, which I find really appealing. It's simply the stories, the conversations. They're very hands off, the documentary makers, and they really just let their subjects talk and interact, and it's really quite beautiful, actually. Some affected quite strongly, actually, by the stories. And it's people who are just getting into dating, who haven't had much. There are others who've been in a relationship for a while, and they're talking through their relationships, and it's very tenderly made. Again, it's another show which I have to be careful not to binge back to back, because watch one episode, they're only 45 minutes long, and the temptation is to rattle through. But I thoroughly recommend people checking it out. I think it's 5 parts, so it won't take me that long to burn through, but thoroughly recommend that.
That sounds really good. I'd not heard of it, so I might actually check that out. And maybe there's going to be more really top drawer Australian shows on international SVODs as time goes through.
I'm sure Beyond will be
Beyond will be licking their lips listening to this podcast, as I'm sure they are. I've been watching Mrs. America. It's on BBC Two and iPlayer at the moment, that was acquired from FX, and it's really fantastic. I can recommend it to all and sundry. It charts the early 1970s battle for the Equal Rights Amendment to be pushed through, and it's got some like really cool feminist icons who are expertly played by the likes of Rose Byrne and Margot Martindale. Really, really interesting portrait of a time. 9 episodes, maybe slightly lengthy. I'm about halfway through at the moment, and feel like it could be a couple episodes shorter, but I think I always feel like that about dramas, so maybe that's me more than anything.
I think our appetite for dramas in episode length is getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We love it. It's the Chernobyl effect. We love a mini-series, don't we? If I see there's 4 episodes of something, I get very excited.
Yeah, no, I agree. But then Des is watching back-to-back entertainment shows.
Yeah, so, but we're in a different ballpark there, aren't we, Des?
It's not mentally tasking. Like, I don't need to think about what's going on. It's just like, it just washes over me.
We're traversing the genres and we're traversing the continents. It's been such a pleasure to have you guys on, and we will be back next week with more Newswrap. Thank you, Des, and thank you, John. Thank you for listening to the Broadcast Newswrap. I'm senior reporter Max Goldbart, and you've been listening to my fellow reporter Desiree Ibekwe and international editor John Elmes. This week's editor is Jessie Whittock. You can check out past episodes of the pod on Spotify and iTunes, or on the website via www.broadcastnow.co.uk.